This is a story about neighbors and about some pets that go missing and about a naked man who keeps showing up on porch cameras. We're talking about Starman After Midnight with Austin, Texas-based author Scott Semegran and his narrator, who grew up in Brooklyn, New York, Brian P. Craig. You're going to hear us talk about the novel, its humor, and some of the mysteries of unlikely friendships and weather and nakedness. You're going to also hear my favorite excerpt from the audiobook, which turns out is connected to Scott's last novel, The Codger and the Sparrow, that I featured on Desideratum back in 2024. If you liked that story, then I think you'll like catching up with Scott and Brian and hearing about this new novel, Starman After Midnight. Yeah, I was really lucky that the closet, that I had a corner I could use, that I didn't have to sacrifice a closet. Like I still have, if I turn the camera, someone was telling me once, like, oh, I love your booth. And I was like, yeah, and my coats are over there. Like I'm actually in my closet. So
You guys have air conditioning in your closets here?
I have to turn everything off, heat or AC, when I'm recording, all of that noise. How about you, Brian?
Yeah, I do have in the summer I have a window unit in the room just outside this, and I kind of have to turn on and off,
Yeah.
when I'm recording. Yeah.
Yes, you sort of give yourself windows. I don't know what your climate is like, but I give myself windows where and I actually have a thermostat, because once it gets too warm, it's not even good for the equipment, right? And then I just
Oh, yeah.
have to take a break, turn the AC back on, and it forces
Right.
me to have a better work balance, perhaps, so that I don't end up in the booth just tunnel vision into the project. Yeah. But anyway,
Right. I use the timer function on my in my computer, just the Windows clock, just the
yeah.
focus periods. So I'll do 20
Yes.
minutes and a 5-minute break.
Yeah. It's a gift. I always tell my kids, when you get lost in something, then you know that's something you're good at or you're supposed to be doing. When you lose
Hmm.
time as you're doing it, that's a cue. That's probably something you should do more of. But
Yeah.
it's also you really do have to set up ways that you stop and take a drink or
Hmm.
breathe,
Yeah.
do something else. But it is kind of a gift to get lost in the work, isn't it? To realize you have to
Yes.
set a timer to stop because you're so into it and
Yep.
That's the best.
enjoy it.
Hmm.
Enjoy it so much. Yeah, I can't believe it's been almost a year since we talked. I was looking up the
Yeah.
last episode and I was like, that was September.
I
So
know.
Scott and I have
Yeah.
said, like, the months kind of evaporate and it feels like time's moving very quickly. It must just be this chapter in my life. But thanks for getting this audio to me, Scott. I enjoyed your voice, as I have in the past, Brian. This kind of storytelling, I think, really suits you too. And I don't really know how to describe that, what that genre is, or when you're looking for scripts, like this sort of fits in your wheelhouse, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to figure what it is exactly, but there's a sort of I don't find it by the numbers at all. It's
Mm.
a unique voice to begin with, and in both Codger and the Sparrow and Starman, and I did shortly after I did Codger, I did a trilogy of mystery novels
Mm.
that I confess were so by the book and the by the numbers rather. And I just had a difficult time connecting with it.
Huh.
Whereas the characters here are so, fleshed out and nuanced. And again, the narrative style, it's hard to describe, but
Yeah,
just Scott's narrative style and my voice just blend really well. And
they
it just
are.
becomes easy.
Yes. Yeah. The same way that when you're lost in work and time sort of slips away from you, right? Like
Mhm.
you have
Yeah.
this sense that you're not tripping over your words. I always feel
Mhm.
like there's a point when you meet the story and you get into almost like a groove of what that author was, how they were writing, and you stop stumbling over sentences because you just sort of have gotten in the groove. So I feel you in the
Yes.
groove in this book.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
think it's you. Yeah, and on that note, I do want to I'll stick with you for a second, Brian, because I think there's a lot of physical description in Scott's
Mhm.
work. I mean, a lot. Every scene, every character, I feel like we get real physical description. And my favorite in this series of stories in this novel happens in an Uber. And
Mhm.
there's an elderly gentleman, older man driving, and he picks up a young girl. And I literally wrote it down because I thought, oh, that just sweet. She gets in the Uber, she tucks her knees up to her chest and looks like a human-sized farm egg in her cream-colored hoodie and brown jeans. Even her leather sandals were brown.
Mm.
And it's just so evocative. And I think that happens again and again, but that one was one of my favorites. And so I wonder,
Mm.
as you read and go through this, like, does that help with the narration, to be able to so visualize everyone?
Yes, absolutely. And you've just hit on one of the differences between this and the work I was describing previously, the sort of by the numbers
Yeah.
mystery novel, um, where there's just something to hang your hat on, and you get to paint the picture.
Mm.
And there's as it is in this particular book especially is so cinematic to me.
Ah,
And so it's almost as if I'm doing an audio description of a movie in some spots.
yeah.
That's how much I'm painting a picture. And
Yes.
and that's the backdrop against which all of these great characters come out to play.
Yeah. Yeah. The scene and the characters are very well set. Well, Scott, that's kind of a good place to ask you to chime in because I think that must be extremely purposeful on your part.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I write literary fiction, which kind of goes to what Brian was saying. Literary fiction's character driven, it's voicey, it's unpredictable most of the time because there's not a typical framework that it's following like with genre. And what a lot of people notice with genre is that it can be surprising, but only the best of those authors surprise people because they're following the same steps. That's what makes it a genre piece, right? And
Hmm.
so, but with literary fiction, I think people either love it or hate it. They either connect with it or they don't. There's not
Hmm.
like a middle ground because you either connect with the voice and what the characters are doing or you don't. And I think Brian and I we get each other. What was interesting when we were producing this together and he was sending me chapters is that I basically had no notes. He was just hitting it out of the park and I think it's because he understands my humor. He understands the thematic pieces, the importance of friendship. And particularly in this book, even a thorny relationship can bear fruit of friendship, which was important to me. And also, Brian has an acting background, so I think, he just had
That
a lot to
helps.
chew on with
Yes.
this story and the one before. And again, he appreciates the humor. I think that's really important, is that
Yeah.
there's some of that in there. There's some dark elements, but there's a lot of humor in there too.
Yes. So we'll try to give a synopsis without giving away too much, because even though you've described this as a literary fiction, there are some there are a couple small mysteries happening in this book that keep the reader engaged across these stories because it is told in stories, in vignettes. And you have like one main voice narrator, but there are other chapters that come out that are written from other perspectives that sort of flesh out the story and the
Mhm.
neighborhood. So for me, it is a story about neighborhood. And that's why these little perspectives, I think friendship and humor are deeply in it. The icing and the glue around everything, but I feel like the cake is a neighborhood.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And the other bit of glue when we were talking about this book is that Seth, the progressive writer, all the short vignettes are his work. So
Mm.
the poems and the short stories, that's him, that's his work. So although there's the chapters of the story, the reader is, whether they know it or not, they're consuming his work.
Yeah.
But yeah, the neighborhood was the playground of, in my mind, how could this kind of friendship bear fruit? Because during Trump's first administration, and after he was done, there was this time where I was like, how could I be friends with someone who had such different ideological viewpoint from myself? It seemed
Yeah.
really impossible. And I thought, well, this will be an exercise to see how that could actually happen. And it made sense to me that it would happen in a neighborhood because you have close proximity to people that are actually in your face. They're not in a phone. They're people that are sharing space in your life. And so that was the conundrum that I was trying to figure out, like how would the friendship develop?
Hmm.
Whereas if it was on a phone, there would be no friendship. There would be a lot of nasty words and whatever. So I've had neighbors who one minute they say something that's like god awful, and next minute they're like, I'm hugging them kind of people. And I
Yeah.
thought, I want to see how a friendship would happen in this kind of scenario.
Yeah. I liked that. I felt like you, in several of the stories, you demonstrate how we, even though we all feel very siloed in our lives, even within our own neighborhoods, within a neighborhood, you are leaning on each other, even in really casual ways. Their gatherings are, outside in lawn chairs with an igloo cooler. They
Hmm.
just are finding moments, and their interactions feel very casual in that way. Beer is often the lubricant to conversation and
Hmm.
storytelling.
Yeah.
I appreciated that. And I appreciated the other ways that I guess one of the ways you do it is through weather, which sounds silly, but we all are experiencing weather all the time. And there are a couple thematic pieces about drought, and you bring up the snowpocalypse, the Texas massive ice storm, which was a real thing that happened a few years
Happened
ago.
2 years in a row. Yep.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And a tornado.
Yep.
So why was that also purposeful? Were you thinking about things that we all experience together, no matter our politics?
Right. And so that goes back to what you were saying is that so, when we had this ice storm in Austin in 2022, which did kill a massive ash tree in my front yard.
Mm,
Its trunk was 39 inches across and its canopy was 60 feet across. And the snowstorm,
wow.
the ice storm killed it. It was covered in almost 2 inches of ice and then it just killed this tree. But
Wow.
my wife and I were thinking about how all the neighbors were shuffling through the ice, bringing food to each other's house. Our water was out for 6 or 7 days. Our electricity was out for 3 or 4 days, and everybody was helping each other. And so in those scenarios, you're not talking about, well, who'd you vote for or what do you think about Medicare for all? You're just thinking about helping each other. And so I just think that we've kind of gotten away from that in a lot of ways and kind of like the consciousness of society, not in a real way
Yeah.
in your neighborhood, but just kind of like in the bigger picture of people being connected online, where you forget that well, although their neighbor next door may love guns way more than you do, but they may bring you water when you need it, or if your house is on fire, they may help put it out. And
Yeah.
there's not going to be any discussion of some of these other things, which
Yeah.
was interesting to me.
Yeah. And we are really, just by the nature of our proximity to one another in neighborhood,
Hmm.
we have we have common thread just by proximity. We're just, there's a certain element of like he can't avoid this guy. He's his neighbor.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So
Yeah.
you're sort of forced to find some sort of peace, some sort of common ground because you literally share a fence line.
Yeah.
And there's something to that. You just alluded to the fact that what we said, that was a real happening, and that this ashtray was really you. So how much of you is this story, Scott?
There's a lot of things that are kind of sprinkled in there. Seth is kind of like even just a alter ego of mine. If you just kind of focused on the writer life and the
Yeah.
homeowner part of my life, then that's me for sure. Him talking about, chasing the money or being frustrated with his writing career or the things with the house. I mean, those are real things in my life, and they've been real things in my life, in a lot of people's life, where you just feel like everything's going good, and then your air conditioner breaks, and where are you going to come up with $15,000? Or I've had situations where squirrels were eating air conditioning duct in my attic,
Yes, which is
those
not
kind of
funny,
things.
but you make it very funny in the story.
Right. And those are things that have happened in my life, the frustrating things that it seems like when you're down, there are a lot of things that are really pushing you down. And
Yeah.
that can be one of them. And as much as I love my home and my wife love, we love our home, there are things that are frustrating. And it seems like they just constantly happen. It just never ends.
Yeah. One of the most touching parts between Seth and his wife, I thought, was a chapter where he talks about serendipity, essentially, and how they met, and
Hmm.
this idea that, the universe puts people in our path. That's a nice, I think that's a, I think that's been a common theme that I've heard as I've talked to writers and storytellers over the years, that there is this sense that like we interact with people for a
Hmm.
reason, whether we see it right away or not. But so, do you want to talk a little bit about that serendipity, about that element of the story, and would you share whether or not that's true? Was that a real thing?
That wasn't a real thing for me. My wife and I met online after we both had been divorced. So our
Mm.
that we had a different type of serendipity. And that's another story that's equally as funny. But I think because I'm a writer, I notice some of these kind of like points in time as being kind of part of a story, which is just somebody's life. But I
Mm.
think looking at it from a writer's perspective, I can kind of thread the needle of some things in a way that maybe some other folks might not just naturally or see them in that kind of way
Yes.
because I've dealt with characters in stories and where the arc of their life is, I can see that
Yeah. It's a zoomed out view. Yes.
very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, where you have an opportunity to see, oh, these things actually led. I mean, I think
Hmm.
sometimes we just even don't in our own lives realize, oh, if we hadn't taken that left turn, or we hadn't moved
Right.
to this small town, or we hadn't, and a lot of times for me, that common thread does turn into people. I think, oh, if I hadn't met this person, then I wouldn't have met
Hmm.
that person, then I wouldn't have met that person. And I think our lives are
Right.
so much richer for that meandering way of it. Okay, so let's talk about the title. I think the Starman After Midnight is, there's an element of mystery about it, as I said a few minutes ago, that there's a little part of it where you're wondering throughout the whole story who this is and what this is. But you've kind of several times, I think, brought technology into this neighborhood in a way that's jarring or disruptive to what maybe would be community of the past, of traditional
Hmm.
community. And yet it also is like it's so embedded in who we are and what we do now. So can you describe what is Starman After Midnight? What is the title referencing in this book?
Right. So the two main characters, there's Seth, who is a progressive writer, and his neighbor Big Dave, who's like a blue collar plumber, leans, into the MAGA type. Um, they discover a naked man walking around their neighborhood at night on these security cameras that are on their house,
Yeah.
right? And so they get curious about, well, who is this particular person and why is he walking around naked and what does that mean? But it also kind of comes after some revelations that some of the pets in the neighborhood are either
Yeah.
missing or that some are winding up, dead, and they assume that maybe he has something to do with it, right? But the spread of the information of the Starman happens through an app called Hey Neighbor, which is like a next door style
Mm.
social media app, and that's kind of where the hysteria grows is through the app. Not necessarily, I mean, I guess some people talking it does, but it really kind of hypes up the hysteria through the app because people are posting about it. And the reference to the Starman comes about because when the police get involved and they post pictures of him, they put a yellow asterisk over his private parts.
Yes.
So that's where the nickname of Starman comes from because of the yellow star.
Yeah, I thought that was parts of that were really, really funny. I thought the way you wrote about it, and even there's the two these two characters that you described, the sort of blue collar and the writer guy, are in conversation as they often are, in lawn chairs over a beer, and they're talking about the nakedness. You use a slang term, pecker, which is such a Texas term to me. I don't know why. Like I don't know
Hmm.
where else in the country people call that a pecker, but there's this fabulous little back and forth between them. But it actually has deeper, it's more than, you kind of get to the heart of like our just our comfort, right? Like how our comfort with nakedness,
Hmm.
and what, yeah, what is it about? Is there something nefarious? Is there something, or is he just, enjoying the night walk and the cool
Right.
air?
That was one of the chapters that Brian just like totally hit out of the park because I've had so many of those kind of conversations with friends where it's almost like a philosophical debate, or a debate on morality of like, and these two really got into it of like, well, what's wrong if someone's walking around if they're not bothering anybody either, what is that wrong? And the other one's like, yes, it's wrong. It's legally wrong. But then it's like, why are we the only animals that have to wear clothes and your dog didn't have to wear clothes? And they just got into this whole thing and I just found that so amusing, you know.
Yes, it was. It was. How did you, Brian, you did such a good job. I forgot that there were two characters sometimes. I think you did something with your voice that it wasn't caricature. It's not like they had cartoony differences in their voice, but you did something where I always knew who who was talking in the conversation. I thought you really did. You captured who they were really well. How did you do that?
Well, I, part of it was in consultation with Scott because I wanted to get his viewpoint on particularly what Big Dave should sound like.
Yeah,
And Big Dave is actually more nuanced than you might think. Yes, he wears the MAGA hat and has this sort of larger than life personality, but he also comes from a little bit of money. There are layers to the guy. So I didn't go out and make a big caricature of his voice. I let the
right.
words do it because he does speak very expressively as far as his language is concerned. But I let that do the talking, I think, rather than sort
Mhm.
of just make him, this sort of cartoon of what you might think he'd sound like. So, but there's something, and actually it's just occurred to me, in some of the best dialogue, it is sort of musical, you
Mm,
know. Because the thing that popped into my head was David Mamet, who's as a playwright, he's probably sort of on the wane in terms of influence and prominence. But when he wrote dialogue, and you got two actors who really connected with it, it just danced. It was just so
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah,
And I think that's what I was trying to do with Seth and Big Dave. Because they're friends, because they're used to talking with each other, there's surprisingly no awkwardness to their dialogue and their
yes.
conversation. And that's clear in the writing, and I hope I conveyed that.
Yes, it's very casual. They're very conversational.
Yeah.
They talk about all kinds of things.
Hmm.
Yeah, easily. I agree. I love the analogy of music. I think that's, and where I remember hearing you do that is thinking of musicality is actually another character. It's one of the sort of side stories that happens outside of this main character relationship. And it has to do with an owl, and
Oh.
uh, you make an owl noise,
Mhm.
and it comes in to a
Mm.
story told by Hank, right? Is it Hank that tells that story? That is a good place to pause and listen to that scene with the owl and the character Hank. Hank is an Uber driver who is just dropping off a passenger named Elle at her destination. This is from Starman After Midnight, written by Scott Semegran, narrated by Brian P. Craig.
He looked at the young rider in the rearview mirror. "Do you want me to?" he said. "You can drop me here," she said. As soon as the minivan stopped, she pulled on the sliding door handle and was out the door, walking briskly toward a playground shrouded in darkness from the canopies of oak trees and the curtain of night. Hank watched her until she disappeared into the distant black. With his left hand, he jabbed a button on the screen of his phone, indicating that his ride was complete and he was ready for another rider. He turned the steering wheel to the left and slowly maneuvered the minivan back toward the entrance. The van moved at a crawl as Hank peered into the darkness enveloping the playground. Something stirred in his gut. You can call it intuition, you can call it gut instinct, but whatever you want to call it, Hank surrendered to it. He parked the van in place and rolled down his window. He could hear the hum of a busy street in the distance. Then the bass from a car stereo thumping a staccato beat from somewhere else. He heard the hoot of a great horned owl, one he himself heard occasionally in the middle of the night or very early in the morning while he snuggled with Doris, or even when he made love to her. The owl would sing to them, "Hoo-ha-hoo, hoo-ha-hoo." Hank smiled, but he didn't hear Elle at all. That feeling in his gut gnawed at him. The Hey Neighbor app chimed and Hank read the notification. His neighbors were discussing the Starman and debated his whereabout. Was he one of their neighbors, or someone who came to their neighborhood from another part of town? Was he a pervert, or simply deranged? Was he a potential threat to someone, or just running around naked for a thrill? He scrolled through the comments. There seemed like hundreds of them from worried parents and frightened friends. Hank turned in the direction where Elle disappeared into the darkness. Perfect place for a creep, he thought. Just then, a notification came from Doris. She was on a 15-minute break and was just checking in with Hank. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Hank grabbed his phone from the cradle and typed a quick reply. "If someone was in real trouble, even a complete stranger, would you help them?" He watched the 3 dots dance as Doris typed her reply. "Of course." "That's all I needed to know." "Everything okay?" she replied, but Hank didn't answer her. Unbeknownst to Doris, he had placed the phone back in its cradle and was already stomping through the St. Augustine grass toward the dark playground, leaving the minivan's engine running while it sat in the middle of the parking lot, the driver door wide open, the headlights beaming toward the street. He maneuvered around a metal slide and past the merry-go-round, then stepped between 2 brightly painted snails impaled by metal springs from the ground with handlebars for antennas. They danced when he passed. He rolled his hands into angry fists, his knuckles stiff yet strong, his tendons aching with age. He appeared old to most people, but he wasn't fragile. He was like an ancient boulder, not moving often but inflicting damage when it did move. He had the image of the Starman in his mind, that pale pervert, that ghostly deviant. He knew he would pulverize him when he found him. He knew this with absolute certainty.
I think you're pacing for it, and the way that it wove into the story, it was giving us clues to that bigger picture of what's happening in the neighborhood. But I also think he's in that moment, he's thinking about Starman. And is he a pervert? Is he deranged? And I think he's feeding off of that neighbor app, which Scott had mentioned, where
Yes, that's
all
right.
these posts and all of this speculation, and it does create a kind of hysteria. It's weird how it's at its core, it's trying to connect, right? We're trying to use technology to connect. We're trying to build better community through connection, but yet it sort of drives people apart a little because then they're afraid of people talking about them, or it it was a neat way to talk about technology, I thought, Scott, where you show us the ways that it's getting us all talking about the same thing that's happening, collectively, and yet also sort of pushing us and making us wonder about each other, setting us against each other. It's a double-edged sword, the way that we use
Right.
technology.
Well, there's something about receiving information in a way that's not you're just talking to somebody. The type of information that you might normally get from talking to somebody. So that's why the neighborhood app was interesting to me, because I felt like I think I would respond a lot differently to if a neighbor came to me and we were having a conversation face to face about maybe somebody's pet missing compared to receiving that information online without anybody's face or context or anything. And it just comes differently. And so, yeah, I found that to be very interesting that it does do that, that this neighbor app is something that's not as helpful as just talking to your neighbor, in person.
Yeah, I like that you also don't sugarcoat this relationship. They do have, I mean, frequently Seth dreams of like smashing this red hat into the trash can.
He does. He steals it a couple times and then it comes back. Big Dave comes back with another and he wonders, do you have like a case of these hats? Because Big Dave gets drunk once and he swipes it and Seth swipes it and throws it in the trash. And then the next day Big Dave's wearing the hat again.
Yes.
So it became kind of like this whack-a-mole type thing.
It just keeps coming back.
Right.
Yeah.
That Seth couldn't just he couldn't get away from it.
Yeah. You definitely you're allowing them to still, it bubbles into actual conflict a couple of times, which is like, doesn't happen online. And I think in online, the anger and the vitriol just keep getting more and more dramatic and bitter, and there's never a release. And what happens in person is there's a release. You eventually stand up and scream at each other or push each other. There's a way of working through stuff that you just don't get that satisfaction in a back and forth online format. And so you allow them, I think, to come to conflict more than once. But that was also very satisfying to me, that they both sort of could lose their tempers and still come back and drink a beer at some point, because they're still neighbors, because you haven't escaped that. I liked the physicality of it. The other thing that I loved was how you wove in, this comes back to the theme of weather to me for some reason, but the Farmer's Almanac comes into this book.
Yes.
And I liked that you referenced that real old school rancher literature that still exists today, that is still,
Well,
part
it
of
exists
the
now.
world.
We just read that company's going out of business. This 2026 is the last one.
Oh my
In fact,
gosh.
Brian saw that in the news and sent it to me.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, there's a sequel. As it turns out, are two competing farmers' almanacs, and I think the old farmers' almanac is still continuing, but the newer one by
Interesting.
about 20 years or something
Oh,
is the one
okay.
that's discontinuing its print edition. So the almanac
Right.
is still going.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Had you heard of it before, Brian? Was that part of
Yes.
your background?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that. I mean, I've heard of it. Because I always saw it in the stores. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, so the idea of that kind of sort of connection to the natural order of things was not quite prevalent
Yeah.
or necessary to growing up in the city. But I definitely heard of it and
Yeah.
knew what it was about.
Yeah. That was actually part of one of the conversations, I think, was sort of this difference between rural and urban,
Hmm.
and how that sometimes shapes our politics and our belief systems, but
Right.
how they actually are sometimes speaking the same language, and we don't even know we're speaking the same language because we haven't recognized it as the same language. And so the Farmer's Almanac was I like that you included that, Scott.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting revelation because it comes from a debate where Big Dave is almost gleeful in his lack of, he doesn't like to read at all. And so they get into this debate while they're trudging, through like a dry creek bed of like, well, do you read anything? Like, do you read, and Big Dave was like, no, no, no. But then he finally admits that this is the one thing that he reads. And it's this kind of like niche, countrified publication, right? That you're right. It's an old school, it's connected to history. It's something that, well, if that's the one thing he's reading, that's kind of an interesting choice, right?
Yeah. And it informs his sense of what is important about the natural world, right? So we would think, oh, this is a liberal value to value the conservation in the natural world. And then he's like, we are deeply connected to making sure that the soil and the earth is well cared for. So it was a neat way to think about, again, how we share a common language and we don't always recognize that as
Right,
common language
exactly.
for things. So it was a good mix. But well, we've been chatting a bunch. Let me look at my notes. Whether there is there is a story that touches on magic. Can you talk about the Melon Girl? What's the Melon Girl about?
Well, one of the things that I kind of started interpreting after I was writing some of these stories was that there was this mysterious element that you had mentioned. I wanted to play with some different things, and one of that would be, well, what if there was almost something that seemed kind of magical happening in this neighborhood? If I revealed something to the reader that might be something magical in the way that it comes about. And I thought, well, this would be interesting because my wife loves to garden. And so I hear about all kinds of varieties of things. And a lot of the things that the Melon Girl mentions, the different type of seeds, those are seeds that my wife, sticks around the house. And I'm always just kind of amazed when stuff grows and we're eating it in the kitchen. It's really magical to me. So I thought, well, let me try to mess with magic a little bit. And maybe have that be a path that the reader could go down that, could the Starman be something that's a little more out there than, just someone in the neighborhood? It just seemed like an interesting, thing to play with a little bit.
Yeah. Yes, it caught me off guard. I wasn't
Hmm.
expecting it.
Right. And so magical realism in fiction, and that's also one of those things that people either love it or hate it. But I always feel like there's some kind of magic element going on in nature. And so I wanted to kind of throw that into the mix of this neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, I mean, through snowpocalypse and through a tornado, we are reminded that so much is out of our control as humans, right? Or
Right.
we're not as, I don't know, we're not as smart as we think we are. I don't know, that
Mhm.
there is some element of something beyond us that happens in the neighborhood. Yeah.
But she is also a connecting character because she pops up in various stories, where
Mm.
she's pulling her cart of
Yes,
melons
we think
around.
she's real. I think,
Mhm.
oh, this wasn't a made up story. She's
Right.
real.
She
She's in the
she
neighborhood.
pops up in different, and other neighbors see her and she interacts with them. So kind of like the log lady in the show Twin Peaks, she just kind of pops up holding her log, but there's never any explanation of why she's holding the log.
Right,
And that was something that I thought, well, I like those kind of little joyful things that there is no explanation of why it's there. It's just
right.
something fun that's there, you know.
It just reminds us that we're not as smart as we think we are. We don't have all the answers,
It's-
right? Yeah. She's
yeah.
inexplicable. Yeah.
Hmm.
And there's a rhythm to it. Back to Brian's point. There's a rhythm to that story. There's literally
Hmm.
like she has almost a chant that
Yeah, there's
is really
alliteration.
fun.
There's our little
It's
chant.
fun in
Yes.
audio.
Hmm.
It's fun in audio. Brian, did you think this was good material for audio? Sometimes it's harder, but I think especially when there's a lot of short stories, but I felt like this one, like
It,
what it was challenging about it from an audio standpoint.
well, it was actually rather helpful that at least from a narrative standpoint, it is the same voice going through.
Mm, mm,
So that helped. But again, I thought of it in terms of painting pictures. Here's this over here, which, and you can imagine, one of those dolly shots, just sort of moving around the
mm,
block, and and here's this over here, and here's that over here, and then it settles here on Seth and Big Dave for a little while, and then it moves back out and settles on, these other neighbors, So, but it it kept actually kept everything fresh
Mhm.
in the sense that because the narrative gets broken up, you can move on and for, you know, 5 minutes look at it from another angle. So there was always something new happening all along the way.
Yeah.
And that and yet and that is a challenge in a sense because, um in terms of rhythm and music, sometimes I had to shift a little bit, because these different stories and vignettes had different tones to them.
Hmm.
But, it did just keep me on my toes. And I think, and I hope, that the narration stays fresh throughout, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think you did a great job. And I
thank
love
you.
actually that the answer to the question about the difficulty about audio is visual. That you
Yeah. So
Oh, really? Because you are like
yeah.
an audiobook, that's to me, that's one of the magical elements of the genre of audio is that it's supposed to be stimulating parts of your brain that you can imagine
Mhm.
things. And so this idea of a sweeping dolly shot and settling in and honing in is a really just a fabulous way of describing like what you want your experience in an audiobook to be like, you know.
Yeah.
I think I think it's so funny how we have like the written page and then a voice in our ear and what happens then the chemistry, the magic of what our brains do with it. So
Mhm.
it's a great, this is a great book for that, I think, for us to be able to visualize and see things and imagine things. Is
Yeah,
there
what Brian does a
anything?
really great job with, which I wasn't sure, and that's no knock on Brian, is that there's 10 poems, 10 short stories, and a novella that has 10 chapters. It's a lot of different types of things. When I published this book, I didn't originally have the idea that I was going to turn it into an audiobook.
Mm,
I didn't know that it would work as an audiobook. It just seemed it was kind of a grab bag of things. I was really experimenting with different written forms
yeah.
because I hadn't done that in quite a long time and hadn't written poetry in a long time. And so, but yeah, because it's Seth narrating all of it, because they're his stories, his poems, then, there is that kind of thread that goes through.
Yeah.
And Brian did a
I
great
like
job.
I like the description of grab bag because it is.
Mm.
I did reference so I listen, on a headset and I'm walking around doing other things and I would pull up, I'm like, am I in a chapter? And that was one of the ways that I would anchor myself into the story, be like, oh no, this isn't a chapter, this is an interlude between chapters. And
Hmm.
that was clear by the little sort of title sections that you would give the narrator. Brian would say out loud the title of something and I'd realize, oh, I'm not
Hmm.
in a chapter. It does feel experimental or yeah, it's unique. It's a different format for sure than what I typically am listening to. And yet you had an overarching story. You give us
Right.
satisfaction as a reader. I don't want to give away what that is because I do think it's very nuanced and was very satisfying, honestly, to get some answers, to figure some things out in the neighborhood.
Hmm.
Felt really nice. I thought you and it kept me listening. But like the last third of the book, I just stopped what I was doing and started listening to the rest
Oh,
instead of
good.
putting it away. Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
which is unusual, I think, for something that is in vignettes because usually those are known for being like this was easy to put down and come back to. I only had a few minutes, but I was compelled to keep listening because you did
Hmm.
provide a kind of mystery that you reveal, that you give answers to.
No, I'm just really pleased with how it came out. Like I said initially when I published the book, I wasn't thinking about audiobook. I'd, produced a few other ones, but I guess I just didn't think it would work. And I'm so pleased that it did because I think Brian and I just work really well together.
Yeah.
And it's been kind of a surprise the reception that the book has gotten because I did think it was a little more experimental.
Hmm.
But then when I would go to these book festivals and people would come up to me, they're like, when's the audiobook coming out?
Oh,
And I
that's
remember I'd had
nice.
this, I'm not going to call it an argument, but I had this discussion with my wife. I was like, I'm not doing it. And she's like, you're eventually going to do it. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then, but then we were at these book festivals and she was with me and people kept asking for it. So then that's when I contacted Brian. And then of course my wife said, see, you're going to do it. So,
See,
and I'm glad I
see,
did.
Yeah. Well, can you tease anything about what's coming up next for you, Brian? Are you working on anything that you're real? I know you also do things on stage, that you are not just
Hmm.
a booth man.
Hmm.
What are
Well,
you most excited about? What's coming up next that's
what am
got you
I
excited?
most excited about? Well, from a just a voiceover professional standpoint, I'm going to be doing a radio imaging demo, which is something completely different from audiobooks.
Mm.
But I'm in the middle, in between two audiobook projects at the moment, though. So I just did the recording on a an edited version of the Church Committee report, which came out in the 70s, and it was a Senate committee that investigated the abuses of the intelligence community after the Second World War. So,
Wow.
so that's coming out in January sometime.
That's
But,
fascinating. Now
yeah,
for something completely different. Yes,
exactly.
that's so a nonfiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's actually
interesting.
mostly what I do, and it's always good to jump in on the fiction part.
How about you, Scott? What are you most excited about coming up?
Well, I have two books that I've been working on, not simultaneously, but been going back and forth. And they're both one of them is kind of like in a fourth or fifth revision state. It's pretty far along to being, close to finished. The other one, I just finished the first draft back in September, and I've been just started revising it. So I'm hoping one of those will be the next one I hand over to my agent to see if he can do something with it. So I've been
Mm.
jumping back and forth now from traditional publishing to self-publishing. So I'm hoping to go back to traditional publisher with the next one. So we'll see.
It's fascinating to me that you can have room in your brain to keep two different narrative stories in different stages at
Mm.
once.
I actually have a third manuscript
Ah,
that I
that would
know.
break me. That would
I
break me
know
for
I've
sure.
been more prolific now than ever. My
Oh.
my writer brain has just been going a lot
Mm.
here in my 50s. So I've been, as it comes, I've just been letting it happen. So, which was different from when I was younger because I had very frustrating periods and then long droughts of not doing anything and then going
Mm.
back and doing something. And so now rather than getting into a drought, if I have an idea for something, I jot down notes and then when done, I just jump into something else. And so what's easy for me then is I can just compartmentalize the stories because to me they're just absolutely different. I'm not
Mm.
thinking about it as like it's all fiction and it's jumbled together. It's more like they're just completely different worlds.
That's
So,
really cool. That's really
yeah.
cool. I also think it's great advice for anyone trying to get their creative juices going to not push anything away. If it bubbles up, pay attention to
Yeah.
it instead of being like, well, I'm in the middle of this and I have to focus on this and I have to push things away that don't fit in whatever it is that you think you need to be creative about right now,
Mhm.
but to allow whatever new ideas are trying to get through to come through.
Right. And my wife is very supportive too, so that's been helpful.
Yeah,
She's my first reader. She edits, she helps me with things.
that's
And
great.
so she's been very helpful with that too.
Yeah.
I think
Yes, there's
that's
nothing
like
like a
an
good cheering
unsung hero in
section.
someone's life is a supportive person, whether it's a spouse or a
Yeah.
sibling or, whoever that's just like, you need to go do that thing. And she's that person.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Same
Okay.
here.
Yeah, that we just really you can't even quantify how valuable it is for someone to say, keep doing that thing. You should go do
Hmm.
that thing that you're good at. Right. It's validating, but it's also in the encouragement is hard to quantify because that is really you don't always have it inside. When it can
Right.
come from somewhere externally, it can really move you forward. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my wife, there's this thing that if she sees that I'm in a grumpy mood, she's like, "You're not writing, are you? You should be writing because you seem like."
That sounds a little bit like, are you hangry?
Right.
Do you just need a cookie?
That's right. You just need to go write a little bit, and I need a cookie while I'm writing, so that's like a twofer. That
Super.
those things have to
Exactly.
happen together.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to me about it. You guys are just so delightful to interact with. And
Yeah, one thing that we didn't mention that I realized is that the Uber driver is Hank, who is one of the two main characters in Codger and the Sparrow, and he makes a reappearance
yes,
here briefly. So
Right. The
that was
neighborhood
fun.
Wellsport. is the neighborhood he lives in The Codger and the Sparrow.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, Stephen King has Castle Rock, which is his town in Maine. Well, Wellsport's it's appeared in a few different things. It's the generic neighborhood that's, there's a lot of them in Austin that were built in the 70s or 80s.
Mhm.
And so when I was writing these stories, I remembered, well, Hank lived in Wellsport. And I missed him at that point when I was writing this book. And what would he be doing right now? What would be a funny kind of after that story? And I thought it would be funny that he was driving a minivan as an Uber driver. That was just humorous to me after the pink hot rod Barracuda that he had before, which wouldn't pass for an Uber driver. You have to have 4 doors and all that kind of stuff. So I remember mentioning that to Brian that, Hank's in this story.
Mhm.
So
And maybe that's why it did resonate with me so much, Brian, because I immediately recognized your voice from Hank.
Yeah.
And he was someone familiar to me in this new neighborhood. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Okay, you guys have been very generous. We've been on almost
Thank
an
you.
hour, and it went so fast.
well, I want
All
to
right,
say
thank you.
before you guys go that this is lovely. I love talking to the both of
I
you.
know.
If we could do it more and not in a podcast scenario, I would say yes.
Oh.
If you were like, let's just get together and talk about stuff.
I've got some lawn chairs and an igloo.
And some
Y'all wanna
beer.
come
Okay.
come on
Have
over.
some beer in the fridge, right? There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah,
Thanks.
talk to you
Bye,
later.
guys.
All right. Bye now.
I hope that you enjoyed catching up with Scott and Brian as much as I did, and that you'll want to seek out and listen to the rest of the story, Starman After Midnight. I suggest you purchase the audiobook from Libro.fm. I have an affiliate link in these show notes and also on my website. My favorite feature of Libro.fm is their support of local bookstores. When you make a purchase, you'll be able to see a way to support a local to you bookstore with your purchases. You will also find lists of recommended audiobooks curated by humans. Thanks for listening to This Human chat with storytellers I find fascinating, who I find inspiring. I hope you have a happy new year and happy listening wherever you are.